Good morning. This is our third and final week in the 15th chapter of 1 Corinthians. I promise this is the last one. It may feel a bit redundant to keep returning to this one chapter for 3 weeks in a row, but I assure you that there is plenty of wisdom to mine from this one chapter. After all, it's a big topic. There's so much mystery shrouding and clouding the concepts of death and resurrection. It seems to be a natural curiosity to find out what happens after we die. We're curious, we hate not knowing. It seems like everyone has their theories, ranging from bright white lights at the end of the tunnel all the way to darkness, nothingness. Some people devote themselves to finding out what awaits us after death. Various attempts have been made over the centuries to weigh a person's body as they die to measure the weight of the soul as it leaves the body. Others record stories of out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences, trying to scramble together some sort of pattern or series of events that make sense of it all. Then there's the arts and the media. How many TV shows, how many movies have tried to take a stab at the topic of death? Whether they're attempt to con an audience by doing live readings and communicating for the dead, or Harry Potter offering us King's Cross Station. All dogs go to heaven offers us a pearly gate and ghosts of our pets. And there are entire plot lines of people scientifically pushing themselves to the point of death to try and understand this mystery of dying. I haven't even mentioned the categories of mythology, world religion, or philosophy, of which a vast majority of navel-gazing has collected knowledge directed towards the topic of death. To say that people are interested in the mystery of death would be one of the biggest understatements of all time. As such, it is no surprise that Paul has one lengthy chapter on the matter. It's surprising he doesn't have more. In actuality, he's kind of brief on the topic. But he has said much in his briefness. In the first week, we focused heavily on the hope of resurrection, how that sets our lives on a particular trajectory, changing our perspective on life. The second week, we addressed recognizability of resurrection. Not only will we be recognized by others and recognize one another, but we will all be recognized in this life and the next by our imitation of Jesus, be known as image bearers of Jesus. This final section of the chapter, however, turns yet another direction to address the sting of death. Now, I imagine there are several ways to think about the sting of death. If there were a Family Feud episode, the topic, an audience might answer the question, what is the sting of death, with a variety of answers on the board, top of which would probably be sadness or grief. Someone we love dies, it always leaves a hole in our hearts, leaves an emptiness that fills with sadness and grief. We all know this feeling. We all do. But another answer might be loneliness, the kind that sets in over long term, after someone has been gone for a while and is deeply missed. I could also understand a third option. The sting of death could be described as an injustice. There are times and instances when someone dies in such a way that we deem it all just unfair, unjust, too soon. But none of that is how Paul defines this sting of death. For Paul, the sting of death is sin, which is categorically nothing like any of the other things on the board so far. The difference, I think, is one of perspective. When we think of the sting of death, we typically view it from the outside looking in, as someone who has lost a loved one. But what Paul is writing about is a first-person point of view, as someone who is going to die, someone who is waiting for death to come to them. That's striking for a number of reasons. First, there is a certainty. There's a confidence that Paul has about this topic. that is so mysterious and unknown to everyone else. There is no maybe, no possibly, or perhaps, or in my opinion inserted here. The sting of death is sin. Period. No other options. That's what it is. Just that. How odd. Which is the second oddity about Paul's statement. If we were asked specifically what the sting of death is, as we face death head on, I imagine we would have a whole other set of popular opinions. Some would say regret, opportunities lost, bridges burned, wrong choices made. That would sting. Many might say that fear is the real sting of death. Fear of the unknown, of what's next. Fear of what waits us. Answers make sense. We understand them. We feel them. Odds are we represent them with our own fears and our own regrets. But Paul's answer that the sting of death is sin is an outlier. If it were not for this particular set of verses being read so often at funerals, I doubt the answer that sin is a sting of death would even be an option on the board. People aren't going around talking about sin as the sting of death outside of quoting this one verse. It just isn't part of many conversations about death. Let's connect a few dots to see how Paul gets here. Working backwards, we know from Romans that Paul elaborates slightly on the matter by adding that the wages of sin is death, meaning that death is the natural consequence of sin, or that sin leads to death. We could argue this point with Paul. We can ask about car crashes, wars, and innocents who die unjustly. We would not be the first to do so. But Paul isn't speaking to the particular, but the more broad ideas of sin and death with capital letters. And to understand that, we have to understand Genesis from Paul's point of view. See, the way Paul views death is on a cosmic level rather than something individual. The wages of sin is death because sin is what brought death into the world in the first place. Because Adam and Eve ate of the fruit, could not stay in the garden with the tree of life, they were going to die. It was the natural consequence of their choice. Not because that's the way God wanted it or deemed it or cursed them, but because that's what happens next. Their particular sin led to the natural consequence of their particular death. And as a result, on the cosmic level, sin with a capital S, general, introduced death with a capital D in general to the world. This is not the same thing as original sin, and Paul and I are not advocating that. Original sin is the idea that an individual, on an individual level, be born already as a sinner. Though that is also a rather blunt and misrepresentative idea of original sin too. It'll do for this distinction. Contrarily, what Paul is trying to say is that because sin brought death into the world, the effect of sin was and is death. Not that one person's sins caused them to die from a random vending machine falling on them. Not that one person's sins when they were 12 made them die in a ski accident when they were 49. Nothing like that. Paul is talking about sin on the bigger scale and death on the larger scale. So for Paul to say that the sting of death, sin, is simply to say that death holds power in this world because of sin. Death looms large over us because of not only our own personal sins, but because sin with a capital S is what invited death into our existence in the first place. So the sting of death, power, its effect, its oomph is sin. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. That's the turning point. That's where everything changes. That's where everything is new. Sin has been defeated, and death with it. All because of the sacrifice of Jesus. Or as he says in 2 Corinthians, because God made him who knew no sin to be sin, so that we might become righteousness of God. So that the natural consequence of life, righteousness, not death. And victory over death, sin has long been won. There is no longer room for fear of death, because though we might die, we will live again with God through the power of Jesus. So death holds no power over us, only what you give it. It holds no control over us through any sort of fear, no intimidation. It poses no threat. And none of that explains any of your reality. This is a moment in which truth conflicts with reality in such a way that only one could really be true. And your experiences seem so at odds with everything I just said. Today, we live in the shadow of war. And the fear and the reality of death darkens everything. Yet victory has been won over death already. And that war is over. Jesus has won. Resurrection has triumphed over death. Yet today we live with the reality of racial violence that still persists, despite our best efforts to weed it out. But thanks be to God through Jesus, resurrection has already won out. For all the evil in the world that would claim that some are inferior to others for any reason, God in all truth has offered life everlasting to everyone equally to be an image bearer of Christ, without exceptions to any. Yet today, we are exhausted and downtrodden from fighting a pandemic for 2 going on 3 years. We have done what we could, played by all the rules, still watched loved ones die at a distance, unable to even be with them when they pass. But our story doesn't end today. Today is not the final word in the story of death and resurrection. Death has no victory. Death has no sting. And though we die in this world, we will live forever in the kingdom of God. We will be reunited with those who have gone on before us. Death did not win. Jesus did. Death did not keep Jesus in that tomb. He walked out. So have faith and have it confidently. Live a life in bravery and courage, not fear and doubt. We face today and tomorrow with the full confidence that death and the fear of death holds no real power over you because Jesus lives. Know that whatever comes next, be it war or peace or something in between, that Jesus has already won. Know that whether the pandemic ends miraculously today or it goes on for years, Jesus welcomes all of us into a resurrection life where tears and sickness, plague, and death have no place. And if all of that sounds absolutely unbelievable and unrealistic, unattainable, if you're missing out on that confidence and that courage, if the fear of death rules over your life with threats of war and violence and sickness and everything else, then unite yourself with the right ally, dying with Christ so that we will also live with him. We unite ourselves with Jesus in his death in the waters of baptism, that we might rise with him and live with God, not in fear of death, but in the confidence of resurrection. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow with war in Ukraine. I don't know what's going to happen with the pandemic. You don't know either. None of us know. What we do know, the one thing we know for sure, the one confidence we have as we go to sleep tonight and wake up tomorrow, that the same God who put all of this in order still holds it all in order. What we do know is that no matter what happens, death or life, we live with Christ eternally, safely in God's hands. Without any of this, without any threat of all of this, without any fear of all of this. When we think of the cross, when we think of the victory of Jesus, the one line that always stands out to me most, the one from Hebrews, which simply states that the victory of the cross defeat the fear of death. How much different our lives would be if we quit giving control of ourselves over to the fear of death. How much different would our lives be if we lived for the life of Christ rather than in reaction to the fear of death. Living a life in the shadow of the threat of death is no life at all. Just a slower dying. But living life, the hope of the resurrection, life eternal, life abundant. All of that seems so distant from me. This is a great time to meet with our elders and to pray with them and to talk about how we can bring that distance and make it smaller. All of this seems unrealistic or unattainable. This is the time to talk about what it would take to close that gap and to live into hope rather than fear. Let us choose today and tomorrow and whatever may come, be a people of hope, people of resurrection, not a people of fear.